Let's talk a little bit about initial reactions to what we've talked about this morning. Let's keep the responses, say, a minute or 2 minutes. But what is your perspective on some of the topics that we've talked about? Jim, would you mind starting?
You bet. Hi, everyone. I'm Jim Cathey from Texas AgriLife Extension Service. Our job role with AgriLife Extension Service is to translate research-based information into educational materials, and then hopefully that goes into practice, that goes into play. One of the things that struck me today with the slideshow that was going on was the amount of damage that feral hogs do have on Texas. So I want to put this in perspective. In surveying agricultural groups out there in the counties about the amount of damage, what they tell us is that there's about $5,200 worth of damage done. There's another almost $3,000 worth of damage that akin to damage them fighting the problem. Whenever you extrapolate those numbers up for the state, that's $52 million of agricultural damage done on an annual basis in our state. That does not include damage to wildlife and their habitat. That does not include any damage within the city limits of many of these towns that we've talked about today. Okay, so nationwide, that damage is about $1 billion or so. Okay, so dramatic cost there.
I am Mike Bodenchuk. I'm the State Director for the Texas Wildlife Services Program. There's a couple of federal laws and one state law that give the jurisdiction for the management of damage from feral hogs to our agency. Having jurisdiction and having enough resources to deal with it on a problem the size of Texas is a little different. To keep things in perspective, we take about 20 to 24,000 feral hogs out of Texas each year. Our agency have about 200 employees that work statewide, and we do both urban and rural damage. We know very well the problems that you have, and we see these repeated across the nation, literally around the world. I've been working with Ukraine and Australia on hog issues, and so this is not unique. Our agency is in the process of developing an EIS that deals with these issues. How do you deal with carcass disposal? How do you implement AVMA, humane euthanasia standards to something like a feral hog? And issues you haven't talked about, such as lead contamination. If you shoot 24,000 hogs a year, how much lead are you putting out there in the environment? And so our agency is dealing with those kind of issues as well. There is a problem. It is an urban problem in terms of dollar value of damage, probably exceeds the $52 million in agricultural damage, and certainly the exposure risk is there. So we can serve as resources on this. You know, again, we don't have enough money to deal with the problems that are out there in the rural landscape or the urban, either one. But we can serve as resources for this. There's a lot of papers that are out there that have been published. I've published a lot. There's a lot of resources that are out there, and we'd be glad to help.
Very good, and thank you for participating. Patricia?
Okay, initial thoughts from what we were hearing this morning. One of my major concerns, knowing that we have a landfill facility in the city of Grand Prairie. We have had hog visitors there for about 5.5 years.
Visitors, that's polite.
Guests, if you will. We know that they dine there. And I worry about the suitability of those hogs for food supply. They're really, if you are what you eat and you're eating at the landfill, do you really want to put that on your table? I guess I'd like to see a shift in that perspective in the region.
Okay, thank you. JoEtta?
I'm JoEtta Dailey. I'm with the City of Denton. And from the water utilities viewpoint, we have a lot of the same concerns from habitat loss, definitely water quality concerns, and also safety on some of our wastewater treatment plant and facility sites. And we're seeing more and more pigs in our compost operations and in our wastewater treatment facility.
Okay. And we'll come back to some of those topics here shortly.
I'm Sam Brush. I'm with the Council of Governments, and I have a pretty long history there of working with our water quality programs and water quality management planning in interaction with TCEQ. And so from my perspective, feral hogs have come on the scene fairly recently. You know, it used to be when I first was at COG, I'd have to go to the hill country to see a feral hog, and that certainly has changed over the years. And you know, we have now concerns about the impacts on water quality, because the hog personal habits really lend themselves to contributing bacteria to the waterways, and also their wallowing and other kind of physical disturbance of riparian areas is creating problems as well in other parameters.
Well, I appreciate the initial discussion. I do want to ask some very specific questions that reflect your expertise and experience. If I can, JoEtta, I'll start with you in terms of, from a water utilities perspective and infrastructure, what has been your experience and what would you want to share with somebody about the challenges you've faced with the feral hogs?
From the watershed side, we have a lot of riparian habitat destruction. Unlike cattle, where they generally make a trail and kind of run back and forth in the creek, we see the pigs in the riparian zone, and they root up all the plants in the riparian zone looking for pecans and just pretty much anything that they grubs, anything they can find. But the real long-term habitat destruction we see there is we're losing all of our small understory plants, and we have another invasive species, Chinese privet. And we have that come in and just take over the entire understory under our trees. And so we're looking at long-term losing our forested habitat to this Chinese privet shrub type habitat, which does not have the same wildlife value or aesthetics value or the water quality value of the diverse ecosystem that we're seeing replaced from the pigs destroying the native habitat. And also we have the bacterial problem. As a MS4 stormwater, we administer the stormwater permit, and one of our 6 minimum measures is illicit discharge detection. And historically, the way we've done that is you take a sample, send it to the lab, and look for bacteria. That works great as long as you're not downstream of a cattle area, which in the urban environment, we don't have too much of that. But now with pigs, we're having to look for alternatives. For the last year and a half, we've been using optical brighteners as a detection method for our septic system leaks and cross connections to sanitary sewer. And on the wastewater side, we're also having issues with the pigs being in our plant. And for those of you not familiar with wastewater operations, one of the first steps is grit removal, which there's a hopper, and one of the things you see lots of in there is corn. So the pigs are very attracted to our wastewater plant, which creates a safety issue. At night, we have one operator on site, so they have to be very careful walking around the clarifiers and they're just on the facility when they're out there alone. And then the grit from that goes to our compost operations, so we have the pigs attracted to our compost operations, which is another problem. We have some guys actually with us that work there that give a lot more details on the problems we're having out there. And then long-term, another issue on the wastewater side is phosphorus permits are being ratcheted down by the state and the EPA as far as what we can discharge. And we're looking at ways to meet the tighter permits, and one of the great ways to do that is a tertiary wetland treatment system, which is wonderful, and you can look for multidisciplinary ways of doing that, and combining wildlife habitat and looking for grant money to do that. Except when you have pigs, then you have to fence it because you can't meet your fecal bacteria counts. So it kind of cuts off being able to have that multidisciplinary approach on your wastewater treatment.
JoEtta, thank you. Learning quite a bit, but particularly with the hadn't thought, part of our conversation as a region has been the promotion of environmental water treatment strategies, low impact development, and hadn't thought about that as a hog attractant, but I could see where it might be. That's something to think about for sure. Patricia, in terms of your experiences in landfill operations, I'm particularly interested in hearing how the folks who pay the bills, who make decisions, do you have any experience with the impact of feral hogs on the landfill operations for the people you work for? How do you deal with that?
Well, what we're doing right now, or what we've been doing for the last 5.5 years, we started noticing them in the forested area over in our mitigation area to the immediate north of the landfill, where the Trinity River, any of you that are familiar with the city of Grand Prairie landfill, it's immediately north of I-30, and then it's got its northern boundary right there with the Trinity. So perfect habitat, a lot of nice acreage for them to get out there and sleep it off and root around and have good ready water supply, and then of course come over and, as I said, They have located the working phase. What that means for us is since hogs can sleep during the night or they can sleep during the day, they seem very adaptive, they can flip-flop back and forth. We have seen hogs during the day. With the hogs, we start seeing hunters, poachers. So we began to realize that we have an access issue. It's a little disarming to see somebody come up over the hill at 4:30 in the afternoon thinking we're about to clear out and they're armed. So it's a different kind of safety issue. It's not just the safety issue of a 340-pound animal that could, do some damage, but the poachers that come with them. So
Now, are they coming with a long gun, or are they coming with a bow, or?
they're coming over with rifles. And so we have had to have that awkward conversation with an armed individual that they're going to need to clear out. But it's been okay so far. But we've also had erosion control issues.
Now, have you had to seek funding for, say, posting or additional fencing to not only deal with the hogs, but those hunters? And how is that budget request thought of?
Fortunately, city management has been they've been very supportive of that. What they would like to see, I think what everybody's city management would like to see is you're going to handle the problem as discreetly as possible and as cheaply as possible. So, but we have had to increase or decrease access potential to the facility.
I don't mean to make you work too hard, but you said some interesting things. Have you faced we have a feral hog problem, take care of it, I never want to hear about it again, issue, one and done, it's a problem, fix it, we don't have it anymore?
Sadly, no. What I get is an awful lot of offers from people that will come and shoot them for me.
Okay.
It seems to be a very, it's enthusiastically greeted. You got hogs?
So you're more popular because of it, is what you're saying.
I think so, sadly, yes. And I've also heard from people that I think are reasonably intelligent, I've heard, I want a piglet. More than once. And this isn't Wilbur.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps I should. Maybe I should just start giving these things away. And
they don't talk?
I think it's a good educational tool.
Yeah. They don't sell insurance and they don't talk. Okay, great. Well, and I appreciate that. And I think that certainly some of those observations hopefully will have some questions. Mike, in terms of the question that I was coming from with Brett and now you is, there's a temptation out there to think of invasive species as kind of this big topic, and you try to address invasive species as opposed to recognizing the difference out there. How would you describe the difference of a effective management program for feral hogs as opposed to, say, something with Nutria or the coyotes? What makes feral hogs different?
Well, there's a lot of biological things that go into this, and where do I start? Invasive species are by nature not only non-native but injurious, and so our approach to those has got to be a little different. It's got to be a lot different than what we do with coyotes. Our natural wildlife management includes trying to minimize impacts to the population while reducing the damage. With an invasive species, you really should be reducing the population. And we have never set out to kill X number of coyotes or X number of geese or X number of blackbirds. But with swine, we have to consider the ecological consequences of not removing them. There was a very good presentation about fencing them out of this preserve, and that was good for that preserve, not so much for the neighbors. And when you look at it on an ecosystem basis or even on a municipality basis, as soon as you exclude them from one place, you're including them in someplace else. There's some biological factors. They can have, we see 3 litters every 2 years. You don't see 2 litters every year, but the average litter size, we joke about it, is 6, and 10 of them survive. I mean, there's just a whole lot of reproductive capacity there that you don't see with native wildlife. You have hybrid vigor that you don't see with native wildlife. These animals can survive and carry diseases that will kill domestic swine. And so we have a whole lot of disease concerns. We talk about landfills. We're very concerned at the USDA level about foreign animal diseases that might come into a port or into an airport. That trash makes its way to a landfill, and if hogs are feeding at that landfill, we could have a significant issue with the introduction of a disease like African swine fever, foot and mouth disease, or something else. So our agency does a lot of sampling when we take feral swine, not just kill them and leave them, but we do a significant amount. 4,000 or 5,000 pigs a year are sampled just to keep track of those diseases plus natural diseases. So, you know, the pig's a perfect storm in that it's very successful, it carries a lot of diseases, it damages just about every resource that you can think out there. And your control strategy doesn't have to be, well, I want to protect this corn crop, but our control strategy has to be what's good for this ecosystem as a whole, or what's good for this urban area as a whole.
You bring up some very interesting points, and Dr. Cathey, one of the, and Mike, I may come back to you because you're talking about sampling. Is enough being done to really understand the urban feral hog population? We have a lot of resources, it sounds like, and we need to be better at identifying them and taking advantage of the experts that are out there. But on that extreme side, do we have enough information about, you know, the kind of the contaminant issue that Mike just mentioned? Are we doing the appropriate assessment of feral hogs?
As far as the contaminant on feral hogs, no, those studies have not been done. There's not a lot that's known about the population movements of hogs within some of these urban areas. We were discussing the map over here, and I was looking at some of the placements of where you had those, and I understand that's by meetings like this and people identifying the locations where those hogs occur. That's very good, and it's good that you've done that, but I also want to make you aware that we have a feral hog mapping tool, not only here in Texas, but nationally as well. And among your resources back there, there's a publication that looks kind of like this one. I can get the gang to send that out to you electronically. Just make sure, search for feral hog information, very easy. Everything is hyperlinked in there. But the mapping tool that we have, also associated with the Plum Creek Watershed Project, it allows someone, whether you're in Dallas or elsewhere in the state, to scroll across the Google map, and whenever you click it, it inputs the latitudes and longitudes of where those hogs were found. It also provides you the opportunity to tell us about, was it a boar, was it a sow, what was the size of the group, those types of things. Okay, so there's another opportunity to do some mapping even in our urban areas.
That's a great point. That's when anybody who deals with GIS and represents a point map, oftentimes the true value of that map is indicating where data isn't. Mm-hmm. And certainly the map that Scott has worked with others to develop really points the information that we have, and I think points out that we need a lot more. And that's our feel from a Council of Governments perspective, to understand, you know, that an area that is just like another area that has hogs and is not indicated means, number one, it's either it's real lucky or it hasn't been reported yet. And there's been several quotes. I had quotes up here earlier, and they, I can't attribute it to the right person right now, but it says there's two types of people, those who have dealt with feral hogs and those who will deal with feral hogs. And so the maps certainly go to that. We talked with Sam and JoEtta and Patricia, we talked about some of the municipal, the local government interactions. As experts, Jim and Mike, I'm interested in seeing, what do you see as being the effective attention getters of the folks who ask for your help? What gets their attention? And then when you're dealing as an expert with a municipality or a county, what would you say would be the common information need, the deficit out there? What are people not as appreciative of about hogs that they need to be? Is that a fair question?
I'll talk about it. There are so many issues associated with feral hogs that we could do this all day. Feral hogs have a disease called pseudorabies, and pseudorabies, humans aren't susceptible to it, but it kills dogs. And we've had dogs that come nose to nose with feral hogs that have died in Texas as a result of pseudorabies. We have incidents of pseudorabies in the wild population as high as 47%. We have found the pandemic strain of H1 virus, the kind that jumps into people in feral hogs in Texas. The E. coli that's in the watershed isn't just E. coli. There's lots of sources of E. coli, but when we tested pigs, it's pathogenic E. coli, the 0157 strain that killed people in the spinach outbreak in California was associated with feral hogs and reservoired in feral hogs. What gets people's attention is the tee box on the number 4 golf hole being torn up. What should get people's attention are the E. coli issues, the human health issues, the environmental health issues that are out there.
Right. And Mike's right. What's driven our programming over the last several years has been the contribution that feral hogs have for E. coli loading within streams. Right. So our work through Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board has funded 3 employees that aid in delivery of programs. We've given 51 programs this past year. But now there's 26 publications. I encourage you to go back there and grab some of those publications, put them to use. But there are a number of resources there. One of the things that we've done recently is really entered into social media, how we get that information to our urban audiences. And that's where we could use some help from y'all. I'm very pleased with our Feral Hog Facebook. This jumped to almost 1,400 likes. That's a good thing, right? Our volume is going like this. But y'all have your own Facebooks, and we need to be a part of those on a daily basis.
Those are 2 words I don't think I've ever thought I'd hear in sequence. Feral Hog Facebook.
Oh, yes.
We're making progress. We're certainly making progress. And this is to the other 3 members of the panel, are there resources that you would like to see available to you as you deal with this problem? Is there something out there that would make your job easier, whether it's dealing with your elected officials, dealing with your city managers, dealing with the hogs themselves? Well, any wish list for you? Is it a better education? Is it a more effective disposal system? Any issues like that?
Definitely a disposal system, because we do have the issue with city employees not carrying firearms other than the police, not discharging firearms within city limits. So we do have to have the pigs trapped and removed somewhere. Then what do you do with them then? Are they released? Yeah, definitely disposal is an issue.
Is there a response?
We've got disposal covered. I feel like we're pretty good with that one, and our partnership with the USDA has been terrific. We don't have to have a city employee discharging a firearm. I'm able to say, thank you, we've got that covered. However, this problem, even with the quantities that we have removed, we're just shuffling our problem around. Grand Prairie has the capability to take care of Grand Prairie's problem on a day-to-day basis for right now. But the problem is growing. It's reproducing as we speak. It's going to get to the point where I think local resources are overwhelmed. I notice there are several of my city colleagues in here. We're spending an increasing amount of time talking about this issue. We could go out today and shoot hogs, but we're leaving far more than we're taking. And I think we are going to need a state perspective and at least a regional perspective for starters. And it's late in the day.
Well, I appreciate that. Any other response to that question?
I'm curious about, is there a need for training for your city employees?
In
Educational training, laws, regulations, biology, trapping methodologies, those types of things.
I would never say no to training. I would really like to see a lot of public education.
Definitely.
Because it's getting to be an issue it's encroaching on our urban areas. We've got traps out right now that we're less than a quarter of a mile from heavy residential area. And it's really just that urban interface. We're there.
That's an interesting point. Several of our local governments, not represented on this panel, but throughout the region, have noted that they'll put up an effective trap, and that many of them have moved away from the smaller traps into the larger, only to have them messed with by either well-intentioned or just curious neighbors coming by and deactivating them or doing things that limit their effectiveness. That would be an interesting way to address that, is by saying, number one, if there are cameras there, but typically with a hog trap, if you're caught on this camera messing with it, that's a...
We actually had someone take off with the camera. For that purpose, they realized that they were on camera and they were messing with the trap, so the camera went away.
Okay. Yes, sir.
And there are methods that actually are effective, such as a drop net, for example, where you can pre-bait in an area and not have a trap there, and then set up a drop net, have somebody sit with the drop net, they drop it that day, they remove those pigs and then move on. And so there's a wide variety of methods that we have not communicated, and that would be one of the roles of AgriLife Extension, I think. If I could move on, there's one other topic, and I think that we're not going to set that, but the group and the Council of Governments is going to have a big role in deciding what success looks like. I think eradication is off the table. I'm sorry, with 2.6 million pigs in Texas,
that's a lot of ham sandwiches.
You create a sink into which they're going to disperse, no matter how far they have to disperse. Certainly, the discussion needs to be, what is our desired condition and how can we get there humanely and quickly and cost effectively and all of those things. But the first point that y'all need to be talking about is, what does success look like before we talk about just going out and shooting another pig.
That's a great point. I want to come back to that. One of the roles of the Council of Governments is in water quality. And Sam, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit in detail about what are some of the challenges that these local governments are going to face in terms of, we hear about the regulatory challenges.
Right. Of course, the primary thing related to water quality and hogs is the bacteria issue. And we talked about, some of the health and environmental issues which really need to be at the forefront, but a lot of times everybody's worried about, whether their flower bed got dug up. And certainly here in the Metroplex, we've gone through a total maximum daily load, a TMDL study by the state that confirmed that we had bacteria problems, E. coli, in the main stem of the Trinity River and also going up into a couple of tribs in the mid-cities. And so that triggered our agency's assistance in developing an implementation plan for all the cities that were stakeholders along those waterways. And we have that. That implementation plan is slated to go to the TCEQ for final approval sometime before the end of the year. And then we will have a plan in place that includes a lot of different measures to address bacteria. And one of the big questions that came up during the development of that plan was, are hogs a big part of this problem now? Or are they, because TCQ did the study a number of years ago with data that went back quite a few more years. And so we really, maybe weren't sampling and looking at the bacteria data in a time frame when there was a burgeoning hog population. But now we know, from the more recent information that we've got a problem, and there are lots of hogs visiting guests down at Grand Prairie's landfill, and all through the riparian areas. And so feral hogs may actually be coming on board as one of the major contributors of bacteria, which, and from the state's perspective, they're not all that worried about where the sources of bacteria are coming from. We have high bacteria problems, and we're supposed to be doing a number of things to try and address those. And so, from an information standpoint, we really need to know a lot more detail from the maps on where are these hogs. Are they really, intense populations along those waterways where the bacteria is a problem. And, do we have any more detailed studies about, what kind of bacteria they're contributing, or is it something that we can then begin to get a handle on?
Well, appreciate that. There's a lot of good information that we've heard that I want to get responses to. Kevin, do you have questions from the audience?
Yes. One question that came up was, are we going to create a task force?
I'll take a shot at that. Right now, the reason why we're having a session like this is to determine the level of interest and the information out there that might support a future activity on behalf of the region by the Council of Governments. We certainly at least want to say we have expanded our network of experts and people around the table that we can interact with. If that's an expression of interest, it's duly noted, and we will certainly be back with you over the next several months as we try to process the information we are getting from y'all and from others, and we may come back out with a proposal like that. But we certainly appreciate the question. Let me ask the panel to respond to that as well. Are there other areas or other issues associated? It could be feral hog related, it could be another environmental issue related that would indicate or show the benefit of a organized task force approach to this. I'm particularly interested in the state response, the state folks.
Well, there are a couple of task forces that are in place now. There's a multi-state task force that has been growing in stature. We've also recently created a group through eextension.org, a national effort where we have experts from 26 states that are writing content about how to deal with feral hogs or answering the public's questions about feral hogs. So know that resource with over 50 articles, over 100 frequently asked questions and ask the expert system is in place for you now. If a task force is developed here for feral hogs in the state, then as Mike mentioned earlier, having that, what's our degree of success, having some very defined goals, it has to be effective. We can't just be active within a task force. It has to be effective. There has to be some real charges.
That's a great point.
There are a number of watershed partnerships, which Dr. Cathey actually supervises employees that are dealing with bacterial loads in watersheds. The Plum Creek's probably the farthest along, but there are a number that are developing around this, and we're interacting with them on the feral hog side of that. San Antonio has established a task force to deal with it, and they've got issues from their national park service where the missions are being impacted through commercial vendors who are at the table. The Toyota plant has hogs in their parking lot, to municipalities that are also there. So there are a number of other task force that are developing around.
So there might
Yes.
be models to follow. Thank you, Kevin.
I think, that's what I was trying to do. I knew that just outside of Dallas, I'd already heard Irving and Lancaster and other areas around that had been having feral hog activities, and I just said to our city manager's office, can we do an invitation and just for Dallas County to see if anything else is happening? And so we've kind of started one in the Dallas County, I think, because I think it's a great idea to work the whole region. But we have a question from the audience.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Glenn. I'm in Kaufman County. One of the questions I wanted to ask is, are there any funding available to assist with this? And as well, will there be any grants available?
Great question, and it's one we have been asking and doing some research on. Haven't found a lot of information, but let's ask the panel to see if they have any insight to that.
The Texas Department of Agriculture gets $1 million every 2 years, from the legislature for feral hog abatement. A portion of that money goes to our agency to do control and to do outreach with AgriLife Extension. The Commissioner of Agriculture also has feral hog grants, and his most recent request for proposals were for multi-county proposals that would involve feral hog management. So there is some money out there. In the USDA budget, which we don't have a budget, I got 16 days of vacation this month. But in the markup from the House and the Senate, in the USDA 2014 budget, there are significant increases to our agency budget for feral hog management on a national basis. We spend about $10 million federal dollars on predator management nationwide. Congress is giving us $20 million for feral hog management nationwide. Texas will get a part of that, and we will be looking for places in which we can demonstrate success. And so if we ever get a budget, we haven't had one for 3 years, but if we ever get a budget and that part is included, there may well be some federal dollars, which I don't see them as grants, but I see them as us putting people here to do work. That's kind of the vision, but that's what's got to come out of EIS that I talked about earlier.
Well, let me be the first to request, when you get the information and our program underway, you are certainly welcome in North Central Texas. We will put on a briefing, a training class, whatever you need to benefit both of the federal and our regional local governments. So we'll have a handshake later on.
Okay.
Any other response to the funding issue?
Well, funding is hugely important. Those employees that were mentioned, those are currently funded through a grant through Texas State Soil Water Conservation Board. So in order to keep the machine alive that creates educational materials, I seek grant money on an annual basis to make that happen. So I'm in the same boat as many of you folks in the cities.
Jim, your comments brought something to mind. Are these funds traditionally cost match required?
Yes.
What is the typical match?
60-40.
60-40.
I'm responsible for 40.
So it's not exactly Christmas, but it's a step in the right direction. And that's something that our local governments have to wrestle with.
Okay.
Very good. Any other responses on that?
Other questions, I guess it's kind of being asked or answered right now. Are there efforts at the federal level to control hogs? We're seeing it now locally. Statewide, we hear about it. Are there any federal?
Yes, that funding is the first funding ever to be identified in federal budgets for feral hog management. The feral hog management we do today is out of our existing wildlife damage budget, and they're a problem, but there's a lot of problems. To give you an idea, the money we get from TDA, we get about $380,000 a year, and the legislature's intent is to do feral hog control statewide. That's spreading it pretty thin. Our agency first took feral hogs in Texas in 1982, and we took 86 feral hogs. In 30 years, we went from 86 feral hogs to 24,680. We take that message elsewhere. There's a lot of states that are now killing 20, 30, 40 hogs. We don't think eradication is possible in Texas, not with the resources we have available. So some of this national money is going to go to states with very few hogs in an effort to eradicate them there. Even though we have half the hogs in the United States, we're not going to get half the money that's available.
I guess the word would be control first.
We would like to mitigate damage first and then look at local population reduction second. And I think we can do that, but again, you guys have to tell us what success looks like, and we can tell you, well, to do that, it's going to take this much resource or that much resource.
So I just want to comment that the first question that came out was, is there going to be a task force put together? As you see, with the information that we're receiving, a task force of very interested people would be definitely a positive step forward for the area. It's putting it together, who's going to manage it, what's the process going to be, and so forth and so on, that we have to really look at. But we have some examples, like you said, San Antonio and others that have started, so that would be great. one of the other questions was, as an invasive species, do the feral hogs not have a natural enemy?
Not a good one. Not an effective one. Coyotes eat piglets and mountain lions eat feral hogs, but they don't eat them fast enough, and they really don't do any level of population control. Right now, diseases and human hunting, you know, recreational shooting by deer hunters are the two limiting factors on feral hogs.
I'd agree. Among that suite of native predators, you choose. Are you going to take on a full-grown adult sow or boar, both formidable, or are you going after shoats or piglets, right? You're going after these guys, not the reproductive machine.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Randy Smith, I'm with the USDA Wildlife Services also. Having being district supervisor in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we get a lot of phone calls from concerned individuals with feral hogs. I know municipalities like the city of Dallas with their current efforts, a lot of those are concentrated on dealing with I guess city managed properties or the landfills, the water treatment facilities, those types. How are some of the other municipalities handling the hogs in the homeowners associations, the hogs at the country club, privately owned golf course? Are there any active, I'm not aware of any active campaigns around the Metroplex dealing with those.
That particular question is what drove a lot of the Council of Governments interested in this question. And I apologize, I didn't mean to interrupt. Was there another part?
Well, it's in conjunction that, and it's just a thought suggestion. We have an active campaign with Coyotes in another municipality where we are working with that city and their 311 information system. And we take that information that's called in by the public and we put it on a weight system. We've talked about in this situation, locating hogs around the area. Well, that's one way of doing it, but also being able to possibly weight the problem. In other words, is it hogs next to the schoolyard, or is it hogs at the water treatment, or is it just hogs rooting up the pecan orchard? Each of those carrying a different weight and being able to respond accordingly.
Very interesting question, and a lot of good ideas there. Like I said, one of the things that drove us was the diversity of responses that we saw when we initially were asked about the question. It's certainly not a full answer, but a response to the first part of your statement and question is we've got everything from animal control officers who treat them very similar how they would do to a stray dog or stray cat or the raccoon, to we have certain cities who are sending out their police department to take care of them, and everywhere in between. If I could, Kevin, I'd like to, Brett wasn't on the panel, but he's not off the hook, because Brett is often thought of by the local governments we serve as the first stop once animal control says, I don't know, this is too big for me. And so Brett, in terms of the question about the diversity of a response to urban feral hogs, and when you get involved, are you seeing any trends or any needs that need to be addressed that might be a good first step for the urban feral hog problem?
Y'all hear me all right? First question I want to throw back to you real quick between you and Scott. First off, how many municipalities are there in Dallas County alone?
In Dallas County? 40?
I thought it was like 31 or something like that.
I think it's like 30.
And
30.
in Tarrant County, you throw in an extra 16. So just for 2 counties, we're looking at about 47 different municipalities. Every single one of them has their own set of codes and ordinances they all deal with. And as such, one of the biggest challenges I have to deal with when I start talking to a city is okay, if somebody's going to deal with the feral hogs, who is it? If it's animal control, then it usually falls into, okay, what department does the animal control fall under? Is it environmental services? Is it part of law enforcement? Because if it's part of law enforcement, usually it's not too much of an issue to put them down. If they're not part of law enforcement, then frankly, we got to figure out how does the city put it down. That's usually one of the biggest issues. And then, like you were just saying, or Mr. Smith was just saying, if it's outside of city property, you know, a lot of times some of the cities aren't that interested, and then suddenly it's now, you know, it's on those homeowners. It's on those HOAs. And frankly, what's always interesting to watch with those is, to be blunt, who's got the best political connections? Okay? I know I've seen that, especially with some of the bigger cities. Oh, no, we're not going to deal with it. It's on private property. You know, 2 weeks later, when a certain state legislator or federal guy gets involved, suddenly the city's much more interested again. So that's, to me, one of the biggest issues there is, you know, again, who does it?
Okay.
To be blunt.
And that may be the most basic first step, is to try to identify when that call comes in. Is there a consistent way to deal with that? Other questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
General question, do we have any idea how many hogs are harvested through legal hunting throughout Texas, or is there a harvest information program?
Well, and I'll let the experts speak to it, but since it's a non-game animal, there's very little record keeping except for those who are actually those carcasses that get taken in to be processed. That's my understanding. And
well, and it is in one of the publications. The meat market absorbs about 70,000. Our agency takes about 20 to 24,000. If you look at populations trying to make them stable, and you look at some other data, it looks like over 700,000 are removed by deer hunters. And between 2006 and 2010, the population still grew at 21% per year.
Right.
It doubled between 2006 and 2010. There is no place in the world that recreational hunting has capped a pig population, not native, not feral, not anything. Germany is, I don't think it's quite as big as Texas. German hunters in 2009 took 700,000 wild boar and did not cap the population. And so we're not going to barbecue our way out of this problem. It takes a concerted effort of going out there and trying to remove them intentionally in order to deal with a population that's out of control.
Right. I believe some recent modeling showed that it took 60% of harvest in order to curve the population downward on multiple years, 60% of the population, and we have not achieved that to date.
Have you considered crossbreeding quail and pigs?
The pigs are eating them like popcorn.
It's funny that you mention that, because here we have an exotic invasive species that ought to be in other life forms. I wish that a 300-pound pig was converted into 300 or 400 bob white quail, right?
well, your question and point are very well taken. The issue of feral animal populations is always difficult in terms of how you manage that population. In my research for today, I've come across a lot of older literature talking about fertility management. How close are we to any chemically based treatment to neuter or try to stem the growth of the feral population that way? Or is it still being hampered by the fact that the hogs get into everything and therefore you can't be selective with your application?
Auburn University in Alabama is working through their vet school to develop a species-specific chemosterilant. They're using a specific protein that will only create an immune response in hogs, which is important because there's a lot of other wildlife out there we don't want to pick it up. They're probably a year or two away from that. There's a paper out of England that shows a negative population growth after a little bit. My calculator shows that you have to contracept 90% of the female pigs to have negative population growth. I can't get 90% of anything, not with bullets, not with traps, certainly not with baits. Because they're polyestrous and come into heat multiple times in a year, you will have to keep it out year long in order to get that level of contraception. So when you're dealing with a damaged situation, we don't see contraceptives as an effective solution. Where it's maybe effective is in Germany, where they want to slow the population growth. So instead of having 8 piglets in a litter, they have 2 piglets in a litter. You know, you might still get that kind of a response in a wide spread. Also, European wild boar have a single breeding season, so you only have to keep it out for a little while. We're also a little bit, the regular contraceptive methods and abortifacients that are out there have got issues in that swine are meat animals. And so if we give them to a female pig and then somebody later on shoots that pig, we could have significant problems. There is a chemical available, Gonacon, that is an injectable, and with an injection you can get 1.5 years, 2 years worth of reproductive compromise. You have to hand inject it. It's a very thick slurry. If I've got one in hand, I'm not sure I want to turn it loose. And so we don't have that going for us. Contraceptives are appealing in that they appear to be non-lethal, you know, and so they have a lot of appeal. And they're really effective if you go to animals that have a short lifespan and high reproductive capacity like rats and mice, because you can tip a population over in just 2 generations. For a hog population to remain stable, a female only has to replace herself once in her 6-year lifespan. We don't see that as a possibility, even with the product that's being developed at Auburn. There's actually a guy at A&M, I think, that's doing some work on genetics for males, trying to make sterile males. And that worked with fruit flies, but all you got to do is have one intact male out there and you have a problem.
Other responses?
Have you considered, or is there out there an incentive program for hunters, like similar to what they did with coyotes? Like, you know, if they get a certain number, then they get something.
A bounty,
Right.
almost?
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Is there an incentive program for hunters to shoot?
Right. Some counties have entered into a bounty system in their area. This is some counties around just to the south and east of Austin. Typically those bounties are somewhere around $2 to $5. So there's not an incentive to cheat. That's always kind of a, you know, would bounties work? Well, how do I know I'm not paying for the neighboring county's pigs? Instead, by those folks with the entrepreneurial spirit come to make a little money. But they are reducing some pigs in the area. It's part of it. There's some that are doing that.
Is there an application of that type of process that's been used in an urban area?
I don't know of any.
No.
Okay.
There are counties that have bounty programs. Understand, I just told you we kill 700,000 pigs right now. At $2 a piece, that's $1.4 million, and we haven't killed a new pig. You know, right now they either go to a meat processor or they're left in the field. With a bounty program, parts of them will go to the courthouse. But the intention is to increase harvest. We would have to come up with millions of dollars for a bounty program to do that. There was a bounty program in Utah when I was out there for coyotes, and we had a graduate student study that. We found that nobody killed any more coyotes, but they spent a lot more time trying to kill coyotes. They bought more gas at the grocery store. So it was an economic incentive at the gas station. They bought groceries at the grocery store. It was an economic incentive for the local community, but it had no bearing whatsoever on the population, on the damage, or on the number of coyotes.
Very good. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and take our break.